It was 1983, and lefties were joining forces to mobilise against Maggie. For decades, governments of both right and left had agreed on a policy of full employment and even given trade unions a say in how to run the economy. Now, all that was being torn up as Thatcher's free market collided with decades of hard-won workers' rights. I'd always fancied myself as a bit of a rebel. Now it was time for me to make a stand and hit back at the system by dropping out of my posh public school. Free at last, comrades. Free at last. And I was soon latching on to a host of worthy causes. As a kid, I'd always been a pathological joiner of societies. I was in the Starsky and Hutch fan club, I was in the Stranglers Appreciation Society, Arsenal Supporters Club, Barry Sheen Appreciation Society, and then I started joining all the political societies I could find, like the Anti-Nazi League or the Anti-Apartheid Movement or the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And then I found the daddy of them all. Chicken's Lib. Power to the poultry.
We in Chicken's Lib learned the inside story of factory farming years ago. We were tired of being told that all is well down on the farms and angry that the battery system has the blessing of the ministry.
Chicken's Lib, I thought it was a joke, couldn't possibly be real, but they were. It was run by two women in Yorkshire and they were campaigning against battery farming.
I couldn't possibly stomach that egg now.
I used to march around suburbia with scrawny pictures of battery hens, shoving them through people's letterboxes, and on my bedroom, I suddenly took down quite a lot of the pop stars. Adam and the Ants bit the dust quite early on, and replaced them with pictures of animals being operated on. I had a monkey with a heart transplant, cat with an electrode in its head. My dad came in and said, "What are these?" I said, "They're really important." It's quite difficult for my dad, I think. It was a bit like Harry Enfield's character, Kevin the Teenager, but without any of the comedy. I was so certain that I was right all the time. I'm right, can't you see? Defying my conservative dad, I signed up to do A-levels here at the local council-run further education college. First day at college. The old college was flattened and this has replaced it. I'd come here to pursue the brand new academic discipline that was media studies. Wow. And the atmosphere couldn't have been more different to my posh public school. We used to have a really enthusiastic selection of lefty Marxist teachers who seized on my left leanings, turned me into a revolutionary.
But what is this disaster I seem to be heading towards?
Maggie Thatcher may have bossed Westminster in the 80s, but at further education colleges like mine in Essex, the left still ruled, OK? And when I wasn't busy making deep and meaningful student films, I was fomenting rebellion in the canteen.
We used to have a refectory and now they have the escape restaurant. This was where I used to spend a lot of time because there was nowhere else to go, and we used to come in the refectory and drink coffee at the machine and smoke fags, and there was nowhere else to go. And the tables were all long and they could sit rather than these little individual ones. It's more of a communal feel, man. We were quite annoyed when it was shut that there wasn't anywhere else to go. So we decided to campaign and blockade the refectory to protest in order to try and get a common room. In my head, being on the left and campaigning and being anti-everything was very important. But it wasn't even really about being Labour, it was about being anti.
OK, so it wasn't exactly an IRA hunger strike, and we never did get that common room. But in the 1980s, the notion that you could actually change the world around you through political action was an idea that got us out of bed in the morning. Well, sometimes anyway. And I was soon launching the next phase of the Alan Davies teenage revolution, running for the post of president of our students' union.
As far as we were concerned, the union was completely ineffectual. No one did anything. There were no meetings, there were no speeches, there were no debates. No one ever came down here. We never organised anything. We never went to any marches organised by the union. We were going to take it over. We were going to radicalise it. Student politics was going to matter. And it's good to see that that tradition is still maintained at the college, because they've really got some really excellent balloons.
My old college today, student politics seems to lack a certain something. Like, politics. Back in 1983, I was planning to take over the union and radicalise my fellow students. But one man stood in my way. The president of the union.
Winston? Mr. Davies.
How are you?
Very well. You're almost as grey as me.
What do you make of this?
As a working-class black kid from the East End, Winston Hales was obviously an oppressed member of the ethnic minorities. Strangely, he didn't seem remotely angry. I was not impressed.
I thought you were a terrible president of the Students' Union.
You thought I was a terrible one?
Yeah. What do you remember of
What
that?
I remember of it was that I did a great job the year before, and I was only into social scenes.
Yeah, you should have been the social secretary.
Should have been.
No, you were well liked. I remember you at lunchtime playing the piano in the hall where we used to put on our plays.
You mean from 8 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night?
But you're the president of the union, you
Yes.
see. We wanted a political union.
Yes, but I'm from a West Indian family. You don't come to college to do politics.
No?
No. And you couldn't do it on the sly because your friends whose parents knew your parents would go back and say, do you know that Winston, all he's doing at college is causing trouble.
So you're in studies?
The fact that I was the only candidate in the 1983 student elections should have made my victory a formality. But when it came to the day of the hustings, I hadn't counted on me and my big mouth.
We did it in the hall, and there was quite a high stage,
It's
wasn't it?
quite a high stage, and it was jam-packed.
Yeah.
You went up and you said all that stuff came out your
Slagged
mouth.
everybody off, yeah. And I just messed it up. I was really negative about the principal, I was really negative about you and the previous union.
Right,
What did you think?
whilst you was up, while you were up there, I thought this rude little white boy, and I thought, thank God I'm black, because I was red with rage. And you couldn't see I was red with rage.
I did lay into you. I apologise. You basically offered to run again and be president again for a second year. You stood up and said, right, actually, you know what? I am going to stand again.
I thought, you can't expose all these wonderful students to this person. And then what would have
Would have been
happened?
great.
No, what would
There wouldn't have been
happened?
so much piano, but it would have been great.
I don't think so.
My bid for power had fallen at the first hurdle. But more important causes were calling me. Like saving the planet from destruction. Boom. When I wasn't rocking the boat at my sixth form college in Essex, I carried my politics home with me, setting myself up as leader of the opposition to my Conservative dad. And it was after one of our little chats that I fled the middle-class comforts of home and threw in my lot with another section of the 80s counterculture.
Somewhere around here was a huge Victorian Gothic mansion that in 1983 I squatted in for a night. I'd had a row with my dad the night before, and I petulantly left home in a flounce of teenage angst, and then moped around college all day. What am I going to do? I've run away. And so Jamie said, I know a squat. And we came to this place, which has now been turned into this weird gated community. Squat that if you can.
Right, this is the main door that we keep bolted. Keep it bolted to stop bailiffs or anyone like that.
Of course, the practice of squatting on unoccupied land stretches back in English law to ancient times. But in the 1980s, living in other people's houses for free became a revolutionary political act, as well as a really good way of saving money.
At the time, squatting was a great fear of people who thought that their houses would be occupied the moment they went away on holiday. Should you leave, you had to make sure you secured the building. Otherwise, there'll be a gang living in your home. There's nothing you could do about it. Be very careful if you're going anywhere.
Once me and my mate had sneaked into our rotting Victorian mansion, we prepared to bed down for the night. But we soon discovered the life of the so-called work-shy sponger wasn't always a cushy number.
About 3 in the morning, there was a tremendous banging downstairs. And then suddenly a man burst in the room with a hatchet. And I thought, this is it. This is going to be like a Kubrick movie where we all just get hacked to bits. And what they were doing was they were stealing all the old fireplaces from this house. And Mark, the skinhead, woke up and told them they couldn't have it, and would they go away? We were trying to sleep, so they went. Then about 7 in the morning, a little man in a suit with a clipboard came in and said, name. And I looked at him, what's going on? And Mark the Skinner went, Mark. And he went, Mark. then he told us that we had to leave and that he was a bailiff and that they were evicting the squatters. And we came down this road and Mark and Straub saw another house with a window a little bit open and they just went in there.
In 1983, Margaret Thatcher won a second election. In her Britain, greed was good. But lefties like me had more pressing concerns. With the Cold War still raging, the fear of nuclear annihilation loomed ever present in our lives. And when the Tories welcomed a huge arsenal of American cruise missiles into the UK, Armageddon seemed one step closer.
We will not accept the Trident, the cruise missiles, or the neutron bomb on our soil.
Clutching my CND membership card, I thrilled to the speeches of Tony Benn and Michael Foot, pin-up boys for the angry generation. For me, the most memorable demo of the era took place at Easter 1983 at the US Air Base in Greenham Common that housed the American missiles. I'm driving close to Greenham Common now. It's the first time I've been here since 1983 when I came down in a VW camper van belonging to one of the college lecturers. And I think there were 9 of us in it. And we saw an enthusiastic hitchhiker. And unbelievably, to me, we stopped to pick him up. And yet he did seem to fit in. It's one thing I will say about your peace protesters is they can occupy a tiny space. Tens of thousands of us peace lovers had descended on the base to form a 14-mile human chain linking Greenham Common with another nuclear site at Aldermaston. Had to find a spot somewhere on the perimeter of the base, but we couldn't see the base, we didn't know where it was, but we could see hundreds of people, thousands of people, all up and down roads like this, all the way around. Lots of whistles and cheering, and so a real kind of carnival, celebratory atmosphere. And then we saw a banner come past, and it was people from Loughton CND. We didn't even know there was a Loughton CND. And we ran out and grabbed them, and they looked quite frightened. And we said, we're from Loughton College. You're from Loughton. Let's get a photo. So we did. And then eventually, in the middle of the morning, I seem to remember there was a lot of people rushing up and down, and then we knew that this was the moment when the chain was going to be made, and we all had to link hands, and there were too many people up there, so some of them were being encouraged to run down there. There's a gap in the chain. You've got to get down there quick. We can't have any gaps. There mustn't be a gap in the chain. And then there came the moment. This was it. We had to hold hands at that moment, and everybody held hands and linked. And there was this odd silence, and we stood there and smiled. But even as I savoured the taste of peace and harmony, I was wrestling with my teenage conscience. In the 1980s, Greenham Common became the focus for a new kind of political protest. A women's-only peace camp. Populated, if you believe the papers, by man-hating lesbians with bad personal hygiene. Now I faced a tricky dilemma. While we were waiting, I noticed that one of the girls in our group, who I hadn't met before, was rather attractive. And I had to ponder on whether it was possible to try and get off with someone at a women's radical lesbian feminist peace camp. I know, I should have been concentrating on the peril of nuclear warheads poised for global annihilation. But Becky and I had matching CND badges. Sadly, never did get beyond the hand-holding stage. But back in Essex, at my sixth form college, there was better news. So-called Nuclear Valley were filled with... I'd been spotted by mates on the TV reports from Greenham. Yes, that's me, in the stylish trench coat from Oxfam. MI5 were doubtless poring over the footage and bugging my dad's phone even as we spoke. OK, so we didn't get rid of nuclear weapons, but I now consider myself a veteran of left-wing struggle. With my street cred at an all-time high, in 1984, I arrived at the University of Kent at Canterbury as a drama student. Surrounded on my course by teenage girls, I was confident that I'd made the right choice. But it turned out I was embarking on a traumatic journey into the bewildering world of 1980s sexual politics. It was the mid-80s, and Maggie was unrolling her plan to smash the welfare state and turn us into a nation of champagne-guzzling Duran Duran fans.
This rally's starting Blytheswood Square at 2:30, and it should finish...
But when the tourists started messing with university funding, well, it was time to get serious. Here at Kent University, the students were furious, so we decided to take action. And action meant invading the registry building. You up for it? Now, storming the registry office is not so easy nowadays because they've got disabled access, so you have to go around the side. It's important to understand that when we got to here, as students, it was possible, we believed certain, that we would be thrown out of the university, that we'd lose our degrees, which was quite a precious commodity in the 80s, and that our futures would be jeopardised. So we didn't do it completely flippantly. Morning. Occupying. I've come to occupy the building.
Have you?
There were so many occupations of the registry that here there used to be a button which they could press, and the registry would alarm would sound and they would go into a kind of lockdown. The sit-in was a regular feature of student life in the 1980s. The general idea being to paralyse the running of the campus and thus strike fear into the very heart of the government itself. People didn't want to do any damage. It was important that we were respectful of the people who worked here. It was a serious political protest. We weren't just kids mucking about. It was like a mini revolution, and the people who were leading it, they knew what a revolution was like because they'd read about it. Some people wrote poetry. This is a leaflet called Poems of the Occupation. I haven't written a poem full of teenage angst since I was a teenager full of angst. If you can't understand what's going on, don't worry, you're not alone. I read a book once, but it didn't help. If ignorance is bliss, we've been in heaven all our lives. Direct action. I remember the one thing that I thought wasn't so great about the occupation of the registry was that we came in on a Friday afternoon and left on the following Monday morning. So actually, there wasn't anyone here. So we, in terms of paralysing the running of the university, we hadn't done that much, but it was a start. The struggle against oppression in the 80s wasn't always so clear-cut. Angry young men like me not only had to fight the Tories, we also had to transform ourselves. With a new generation of radical feminists on the march, sexual politics became one of the great battlegrounds of the decade. And us blokes were in the firing line. I got an early introduction to some of the anger really that was behind a lot of the radical feminism on campus. One day in my first year, I was 18, I was having lunch by myself in the dining hall, and behind me there were a group of women. And one of them was smoking a cigarette, and there was a big no smoking sign. I was eating. I said, "Excuse me, do you mind not smoking? Excuse me, excuse me." There's a lot of smoke, and eventually I turned and I tapped her on the shoulder. And she said, "Don't touch me! Don't touch women! Never touch women!" I said I was going to ask you. Never! Never asked anyone to stop smoking since, or knowingly touched any women. In the 1980s, being a lesbian was no longer a personal issue, it became a political statement. With radical feminism running riot across campus, girls on my drama course were having a great time. Even straight ones, like my old friend Jackie Clune.
I think when you and I both first arrived, we were sort of quite nice, lower middle class Essex girl and boy. And by the end of that 4 years, I was a raging lesbian separatist feminist. I lived in lesbian separatist households. We had to employ female plumbers. Men weren't allowed in one house that I lived in. And there was also the thing called Scum, which was the Society for Cutting Up Men. Right.
But in the first year, you had quite a good-looking boyfriend, I remember, from Harlow.
I did.
And you were quite a good singer and actress, and you wanted to perform a lot.
Yeah.
What happened?
It's like swallowing the pill. You swallow the feminist pill, and from then on in, everything in your life is seen through feminist eyes.
But one of the consequences was that lots of the females started getting off with each other.
Yeah, it was sort of a course requirement on some level, that because they were always talking about theory and practice. And we'd all done the theory, and it was kind of like, for a lot of women, the next step. It was like, well, yeah, if men are the oppressors, why am I still sleeping with them? It was definitely a sort of rash of lesbianism erupted over the whole campus in about 3 months.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, have you heard? She's out, and we called it coming out.
In the mid-80s, Mrs Thatcher's grip on political power may have been stronger than ever, but she couldn't control her private lives. Gay men and women were standing up in Britain and demanding equality more confidently than ever before. When a piece of Tory legislation known as Clause 28 made it a crime to promote homosexuality as normal, battle was joined.
We must be out and about, in pubs and clubs and in the classroom, promoting homosexuality.
Being publicly gay in the 1980s was still a risky career move. But renowned actor Ian McKellen bravely stepped out of the closet to take up the fight.
Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me.
At the height of the campaign against Clause 28, McKellen came to speak at our university campus, and I wore my pink triangle badge with pride. This place was rammed full of people, and there was a real buzz and a hubbub in the air. And then McKellen came on to speak, and you could hear a pin drop in here.
AIDS, of course, is the problem. People's ignorance and fear of what AIDS is.
And his voice filled the theatre as if it was running up over the seats or going through you somehow.
Government is ignorant of what it's like to be a homosexual.
Sir Ian's speech had a powerful effect on me that day. I wondered if he even remembered what must have been one of many such talks he gave at the time. I paid him a visit at his home in London.
We're getting quite a theatrical knock.
Hello.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm very well.
How can I help you?
Come and talk to you about the 80s.
I know. It's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
When this nasty little law was introduced, there were a lot of people who were just ready to shout and burst out and say no, no, no. Made me come out of the closet finally at age 49.
But also, do you ever feel like you were obligated, or some people felt you were obligated to campaign for gay rights?
I'd been to debates in the House of Commons where the most horrible things were said about gay people. Even writing a letter or an article for the paper, you felt, I know I'm going to get some horrible letters back, and I did, you know, death threats and all that.
Couldn't you just be gay and live your life away from politics, or did you just want to do that?
Well, I'd had 49 years of living away from politics and getting on with being gay, fairly openly, actually. I just had omitted to tell my family.
Right.
My sister, my nieces and nephews, my stepmother. But this struck absolutely to my heart, and what you saw was someone who was born again. I mean, that's what it...
It was a very lovely, liberating feeling. You seemed to, when you were speaking, you seemed to be very... Well, I don't know if happy is the right word, but...
Yes, I was happy. Mm. So to go down to Kent and see these keen, young, enthusiastic girls and boys getting the point, well, you thought it's going to be all right eventually. Let me just come and show you this tape.
OK.
Turned out Sir Ian had a surprise up his sleeve. A video recording of his talk 22 years ago, from the very day I was there.
Tuesday, 15th of March, 1988.
Oh, wow. This is all the people from my year. This Julian has no musical talent whatsoever on the end.
You're right, he doesn't quite know what to do.
He doesn't know what to do.
Trying to get the rhythm.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ian McKellen.
One of my strongest memories of the day was me bravely putting my hand up to ask a question. But, as usual, my best bit seemed to have hit the cutting room floor.
You can't remember where you sat.
I think I sat over that way.
Yeah, well... Come on,
And then,
pan out, let's have a look.
a historic film find.
Yeah, that's me, yeah.
Exciting, but not on camera. Can you remember what your question was?
Yes, I do remember it, because there was a gay guy who lived in Whitstable, and he was quite angry about this sudden surge in campaigning because of Section 28. And he says, where are all you straight people the rest of the year when we're...
Oh, good point.
When we're suffering homophobia left, right and centre. Take that pink triangle off. You know, you're just wearing it as a fashion item. You don't really care about gay rights.
And he insisted I took it off. It being late, me being tired and not knowing quite how to deal with it, I just took it off and left it. What should I have said?
Oh, I didn't reply.
Was he simply furious that you'd got a badge and he hadn't?
The campaigns of the 1980s may not have got rid of homophobia, but they did get rid of Clause 28, and were an important step on the road towards equal rights for gay men and women. But there were other important battles of the 1980s, the greatest of which would bring Britain to the verge of civil war. Of all the conflicts of the 1980s, there was one, more than any other, that came to symbolise the deep divisions running through Britain.
We will do everything in our power to stop the closure of our pits and the butchery of our industry.
The miners' strike of 1984 would become the most bitter and divisive industrial dispute in British history.
What we've got is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law.
It began in the spring of '84, when the government announced the closure of so-called uneconomic pits, threatening the livelihoods of tens of thousands and even the future of the industry itself.
My big contribution to the miners' strike in 1984 was to sit at home and watch it on TV with a really serious expression on my face. I also wear a Coal Not Dole sticker, and I have one on my exercise book. But when I came to university, I found out that down here in Kent there were pits that were out on strike.
Our students rallied to their cause, energised by a new brand of protest music.
This government had an idea and Parliament made it law. It seems like it's illegal.
For me, Billy Bragg's raw, angry songs perfectly captured the spirit of the struggle.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys?
At one of his gigs, here at the Kent Miners Social Club, Bragg fired me up with his righteous anger.
Coming down here, we were all quite excited to see you. You gave lots of shout-outs from the stage about people who were involved in disputes, including the students at Kent. A bit like going to a demo. Was everybody like-minded in the same room? It was a very uplifting experience. It gave people a lot of energy.
That's it. I mean, that's how, you know, I mean, people talk a lot of, frankly, bullshit about music changing the world. I mean, you know, that's a little bit more complicated. But what we can do, and what I think is the best thing to do, is to make people feel that they're not alone.
We set off to join the picket lines, for together we cannot fail. We got stopped by police at the county line.
Miners' strike continued for a full 12 months. Were you gigging in support pretty much from the start of it?
No, for the first 2 months I was on tour in America with Echo and the Bunnymen. Having a great time, yeah. I was completely oblivious to the miners' strike. It was only when it became clear that this was going to be a titanic struggle between the Labour movement and Margaret Thatcher. This just kept building and building and building, and that was when people started saying, OK, you know, got to get the buckets out. You know, people say, you know, who was your great political inspiration? The terrible truth is it was Margaret Thatcher.
This is a postcard from Mrs. Thatcher's Britain. This is called To Have and To Have Not.
Although I didn't really come from the folk tradition, what I was doing, travelling around, playing solo, picking up information from one town and taking it to another was part of that folk tradition. So the miners' strike sort of politicised me.
Just because you're better than me doesn't mean I'm lazy.
And the thing that really stuck out and is still in my mind was at the end of the show,
They gave you a brass miner's lamp and there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
The people here were very emotional.
Thank you indeed. I appreciate that very much.
How many brass miner's helmets did you get?
Lamps.
Lamps,
Got a
yeah.
few. I've got quite a few. I mean, they're an amazing thing to have. They're like the Oscars of the Labour movement. You know, if you get one, you have to sort of make a tearful speech and thank everybody.
One of Mrs Thatcher's most ardent supporters during the miners' strike was Trade and Industry Secretary Norman Tebbitt. The second most hated person in Britain.
Norman.
Yes, leader.
Send in the Chancellor, will you?
Yes, leader.
2 years earlier, he'd provoked fury by telling the jobless to get on their bikes and look for work.
All you're interested in is profit. All you're interested in is your class. You're not interested in people like us.
And it was his anti-union legislation, Tebbitt's law, that paved the way for the Tory government to take on the miners.
That's what I think of them.
He also happened to be a member of Parliament for Chingford, close to where I grew up in Essex. Seeing as we had so much in common, I arranged to meet Lord Tebbitt at my local Conservative Party office. This is Thatcher House. Last time I was here was about 25 years ago. I was coming home from the pub because I lived but 4 roads away, and I really needed a pee. And I thought, where am I going to go to the toilet? And then I remembered, oh yeah, Thatcher House. And I peed in that letterbox there. I don't think I peed up into it. I think I went into I think I had a pint glass and I tipped it in. And I had a spray can and I sprayed something on the wall, and then I broke the drain pipe. When I broke the drain pipe, it was really loud, so I ran away. I'm going to see if I'm brave enough to fess up to Lord Tebbitt. Familiar face? Familiar face? I just, whenever I see him, I imagine him with the underpants outside the trousers. It's a terrible thing. Hello there.
Hello.
I'm Alan, Lord Tebbitt.
Very nice to meet you.
Thanks for giving us your time.
Not at all, not at all. It's a pleasure. Come and have a seat.
Thank you.
Get rid of that bloody awful jacket.
Should have smartened up. A fine array of biscuits.
Yeah. You know this neck of the woods better even than I do.
I grew up around here, yeah. Yeah. I was born in Chingford.
Yeah.
I confess that I was not a Tory, and not a Tory fan, and that, in fact, I came past this building one time. I've been to the pub. I know you got up to some hijinks, and I confessed to vandalising the drain pipe.
Good God.
And spraying on the wall.
Good.
And I relieved myself.
Dear
and
me.
I apologise to you and the people of the building. Good to get that off my chest. I was quietly relieved not to be frog-marched from the premises. Or coshed over the head, perhaps.
All right, I give in.
Clearly the good Lord had mellowed with age. So going into your second term, you're in with a good majority, and the opposition are weak. Is that why you ended up taking on the miners?
We never took on the miners. Arthur Scargill took on the government. And one of the most important things to remember about the miners' strike is that Arthur Scargill never had a national ballot. And he never had a national ballot because he knew he would lose it.
Did you anticipate those battles of Orgreave and those huge numbers of police involved?
Well,
because on the one hand you're saying you can't bring flying pickets in, but you were bringing the police up from London and everything. I mean, it was really quite ugly at times.
The only reason the police were there was to protect miners that wanted to go to work.
It was a horrible feeling in the middle of the miners' strike that the miners were becoming cast as bad people, and the police were dealing with them. It was close to civil war, it felt at times. I mean, there were thousands of men There was a miner's helmet and the policeman's helmet, and they're the same guys, really, coming from the same towns.
But it was an unavoidable tragedy as far as we were concerned.
I was a coal-knocked Dole strike supporter. It seemed from my point of view that for an energy source, there was a case to be made, particularly as there was high unemployment, to prop up these industries and give these people more time to create alternative employment.
You just can't do it that way, and Scargill wouldn't have had it that way. Scargill wanted a strike. He didn't want better benefits for the miners. What he wanted was to see Thatcher out of the government.
The strike was to last for an entire year. As the miners' controversial leader, Arthur Scargill, squared up to the most uncompromising Prime Minister in living memory. It was far more than an industrial dispute. The very future of the labour movement, and with it 100 years of hard-won workers' rights, seemed to be at stake. Back at the local miners' club in Kent, I wanted to hear what the striking men had to say about it.
We was pushed towards it because of what Thatcher wanted to do. She wanted to close pits without negotiations, without going to the union and say, well, this pit wants to close because it's getting exhausted. But there was no negotiations. Scargill said it's not just a question of half a dozen pits that the Thatcher regime are saying. It's a broader spectrum than that. They intend to close a lot more pits. And he was true to his word.
And you regarded him as a defender of the communities and a defender of people's livelihoods?
Definitely.
The proof is in the history, isn't it? I mean, the coal industry has been decimated around the country. It no longer exists. And now we're importing coal from here, there and everywhere because our own pits are shut down. And I mean, and England is built on coal.
Tell me a bit about your experience in picketing.
For the 54 weeks that we was out, we didn't have no money coming in. We wouldn't have made it without the different unions and the students' union supporting us. But obviously your mortgage wasn't paid. Financially, you lose everything.
There's a lot of feelings still running strongly from those days.
There's ill feeling towards the people that went